I want you to be loud and wrong, because that's what I'm getting ready to be. I'm so pleased to be here in New York. It is far too cold, but it's not your fault. So I'm going to try to warm you up as well as to make you aware of some of the really challenging issues when it comes to understanding culture and its importance, its vibrancy, its value in interventions for behavior change. Barbara has already shared with you, I do a lot of work related to sex, and it's caused me to change my life in so many ways. I am the granddaughter of a Methodist minister, so this is out of culture, out of gender, out of school, out of everything, for me to have taken on this career. And I often sit and ponder why I am doing what I'm doing, but I really think it's God's work and that I'm supposed to be doing it. All of the experiences that I have and some that I'll share with you this morning, I think have prepared me to look at an issue that our society and our world is still very phobic about. And unfortunately, it's nested itself in HIV and AIDS. And so a lot of the examples that I will share with you have to do with research that's funded through AIDS. But you know, it's hard to get money to study sex. You can't really get money to study sex itself unless you go to private foundations, and even they want to be able to mirror what the federal government will fund. And so that many of my studies are AIDS related or STI related, but I also look at the contextual issues around sexual functioning, and that's brought me to kind of where I want to begin with you. So I do want to thank you for inviting me. This is an absolutely beautiful auditorium. I want to thank Barbara because she's the one who wrote and called and stayed on my team to get a hold of me. I was just here about 2.5, maybe 3 weeks ago, so I've been in New York 3 times since the middle of January. It's unusual for me to come this often, but I knew Barbara was not going to hear if I tried to chicken out at the last minute. So here I am. I want to also thank my team, Brenda and Misha, who put together this presentation for me and kept sitting me down so we could conceptualize it and I could get to them what I needed to. So I've done a lot of thinking about this. This is really a privilege for me. I seized the opportunity to speak and to speak differently about every topic. If you've ever heard me, I try not to repeat myself. I find that very boring. And the demonstration of a boring speaker is a person who gives the same talk every single time. So I consider this an intellectual challenge of my own. I know that I follow Cornel West's legacy by having been a keynote speaker, I believe, last year. I'm often wondering why there are no African-American female intellectuals. Whenever we hear about intellectuals, we always drag out men. So I hope that maybe after this talk I'll be considered, probably not, but you know, it would be nice if people would give credit to African-American women for being thoughtful and not just being sexual, which is what a lot of people think I am. Actually, they think I do what I talk about. And I am a therapist, and people have come to me in my private practice, believe it or not, I actually have one, and say, well, we came to you because we know that you're good. Amazing distortions of people. But let's start again and off of that issue to cultural competence. What is it that I'm going to be talking to you about? And I think it's important that we define this term. Congruence and competence. We're going to be banting about both of them, but we're talking about congruence right now. That's the knowledge and use of cultural beliefs and values from which interventions are developed. Behavior change is rooted in cultural beliefs rather than the awareness or avoidance of problems. Congruence requires a proactive approach to behavior change that comes from concepts that are known, accepted, and that foster group and not individual survival. If that's not the antithesis of where we have spent almost 30 years of billions of dollars in AIDS prevention research and most behavioral change, I don't know what is. Because I can't name for you 5 interventions that are culturally congruent. Not 5. And if I name them, they are not funded by the government. This is simply something that, according to the government, does not exist. So you can imagine what a difficult time I've had in my career fighting the flow of cognitively based interventions that think as if you don't think about things, you're not supposed to feel them, you're not supposed to have any beliefs, you simply are supposed to go along life as everyone else does, and that is simply not the case when it comes for African descended people. We are unique unto ourselves. The history is significant. I won't get into all of that. Let me just get back to my talk, and I hope that there'll be a little time at the end so you can ask me something. Okay, the language of sex. We're talking about speaking the language today. There are many, many different languages that you need to speak. It doesn't just have to do with something that's not English, okay? If sex behaviors contribute to disease transmission, and disease transmission is the majority for the world, okay? If diseases are transmitted, sex is usually at the base. A comprehensive examination of all sexual experiences should be studied regardless of whether they were willful, forced, or coerced, no matter what age the person was involved, the gender or partner of the person or the perpetrator, the circumstances of the events, and the number of times that all incidents occurred. And so when I was given a K award, I wasn't given it, I was awarded it, excuse me. I had to write the grant 9 times in 4 years in order to get the first K. I'm the first minority to get a K in the world, I have to tell you. And it was more than a notion to get it. That was in 1980. Isn't that something? I decided that I wanted to study the sexual experience of African American women. Well, the 2 things I was told: number 1, you couldn't study African American women alone because you had to study African American and white women as the standard. White women were considered the standard in 1980, so I had to do a comparative study. And I was told that if I did not include European American women, then I would not be funded. So what did I do? I went home and I talked to my family about it, and they said, look girl, you want to get some money, you want to do the study, you want to do the work, walk through the door. So I added European American to my study, and I'm so glad I did, because in so many ways I was able to demonstrate the similarities and the differences. But what I did, and what most people don't do, is I control for all the demographic characteristics of these 2 groups. So I wasn't talking about middle-class white women and poor black women, which is the way that most studies are constructed. And so when you talk about culture, you're really talking about a variety of things that it's almost impossible to understand. But the second thing that I did was to look at the non-consensual as well as consensual sexual experiences of men and women. I started with women in the 80s. And let me tell you just what a struggle that is. Most people don't want to look at things that happened to you that you didn't want to happen, but they were sexual. They just want to look at things that you wanted to do. Well, that's not studying sex. That's good time sex. That's sex on a date. That's a good date. That's sex when you wanted to. Sex is anything that happens that has to do with sex. And so what I did when I included both was to quickly discover that the non-consensual experiences predicted what you did with the consensual. I can tell you girls who will have sex at 10 on their own if I look at the histories of their sexual abuse before the age of 10. I can tell you the girls that are going to get pregnant in adolescence, early adolescence, if I look at the history of abuse and violence before they get pregnant. It is not rocket science. All you have to do is study sex, the way it happens. That is, that the things that happen to you and the things that you volunteer to do are all connected on a continuum. You cannot separate them out, and if you don't separate them in research, you get a mush. And so when you talk to someone and you say, at what age did you first have sex? First of all, sex could be touching the hand, the breast, the penis, the scrotum, the clitoris, talking, texting, messaging, imagining, dreaming. That's all sex. So using that term means absolutely nothing, but this is still the term. At what age did you first have sex? And people will say, 11. Well, do they ask then? Well, under what circumstances did that event occur. So I developed a protocol called the Wyatt Sex History Questionnaire. If you have interest in it, I have some cards. You can write to me. We'll send it to you. But what it does is a structured interview that allows you to collect data on the non-consensual as well as sexual experiences that were willful. And we published all of these things. But when AIDS came along, they completely ignored the non-consensual piece. So I've been battling upstream like a little salmon, trying to get this piece in because it has everything to do with who's at risk. When you look at gender and culture beliefs sometimes endorse behaviors that seem good in a Western way. We're talking about Western, we're talking about Anglo-Saxon, we're talking about the US, we're talking about concepts that everybody doesn't believe in. So when I said that when concepts are good in a Western way, they're really not necessarily good for individuals who don't operate out of a Western mentality. And I got into a lot of trouble with this paper that's cited at the bottom. This is way back in the 90s, but a lot of feminists asked us to contribute this piece of research that I'm going to tell you about. And they wanted a piece that demonstrated the strengths of African American women. And so we carved out a little piece of data and we sent it to them, and they said, this isn't acceptable, this doesn't sound feminist. And I said, well, that's too bad. This is what we found, and I'm standing by what we're doing. Essentially, this is what we found. In a community sample, when I studied 3 ethnic groups, all of the groups were controlled for demographic characteristics. Greater sexual risk-taking, specifically non-condom use, with primary partner, that's the person that they identified as the person they have sex with the most, and that is the primary partner, was reported by single African American women with at least 1 child. They also were known more than Latinas from Mexico, because they weren't from Puerto Rico, they weren't from El Salvador, they weren't from Nicaragua, they weren't from Watts, they weren't from all over. They were all Mexican American women. Excuse me, that's like apple, orange, banana, and pear. And European American women to perceive mate unavailability and to engage in barter sex. And then finally, they were also more likely to decide alone not to negotiate or use condoms with their partners. Well, what are we looking at in the composite of those 3 findings? We're talking about women who were not married, alone. They had 1 child. If you look deeper, they were poor. They needed money. Barter sex is what we do every day, isn't it? You take me out to get a steak, I'll go home and have sex with you. That's barter sex. Did you know that? Goes on for thousands of years. It's not sex work. These are people that women know. Men do it too. These are known partners, but it's a deal, right? There's an exchange here. You do this for me, I do that for you. You give me a big diamond, I'll have sex with you tonight. Married women do it too. But we found that African American women were more likely to engage in what we call this constellation of risky behaviors. And the thing that the other women that I sent this article to didn't like was they didn't ask their partners about negotiating about sex. They made the decision alone. So they thought that was a feminist attitude. That's what I'm calling the Western way. But they decided not to use condoms. That's not good for them. So if you look at the individualism as a model, you'd say, well, these women were strong and assertive and they made decisions all by themselves. They didn't need to talk to their partners, but they were deciding not to use condoms. Why would women, black women in particular, decide not to use condoms? Mate unavailability. About 70 black men to 100 black women in the United States. Did you know that? It's that bad. You talk about getting a partner. You're talking about finding somebody you can hook up with. It's only 1 in 3 African American women in the 21st century who are going to be married at all to a black man. We're talking about a moving train that is wrecking a people to be able to hook up in the way that our religious affiliations and our mothers and our fathers tell us. And then we wonder why women are 70% of the rates of new infections are among black women. Why? Because the decisions that they're making are at their own risk in order to develop the relationships they've been told that they need. Here's another interesting issue. Community-based participatory research poses a threat to the gold standard, which is randomized clinical trials. When you do research that involves the community, it's assumed that you have an experimental group and a control group. Now, those of you who do research here? How many of you do research? How many of you want to do research? How many of you are tired of doing research? That there's two groups at least that you have to have. Oh, I messed up. Let me go back. But you know what happens to that control group? They don't necessarily get anything, right? After they have been controlled, there is no responsibility for researchers to go back and to use a waitlist design in order to give them the same intervention. And in the community-based participatory research and in the projects and in the communities that we work with, there aren't any services that have to do with HIV for women who have histories of sexual and physical violence. And so that having a control group meant that they would get nothing. So the ethical issue is to require randomized clinical trials when ethnic people are involved, when underrepresented people are involved, to have a wait list design so that they can get the same services, they can get the same material after the study is completed. These are very critical issues when it comes to communities that no longer want to participate, that have a lot of healthy paranoia when it comes to research, because they're not really treated well, and their issues and the lack of resources are not really respected. Let's talk about the language of culture. Culture. I'm really challenged with touching this screen. Go back, little thing. Let's see. Here we go. The language, the rules, the values and beliefs passed down from generation to generation. That's what culture is the least studied component for these groups who are currently at risk for HIV and AIDS. I think that's odd. Because when you do international research, and I do, the first thing people want to know is what language do the people speak? So we can make sure that we have a research team that not only are bicultural, but they're bilingual. But when it comes to studying black people, people just do, well, they speak English, don't they? So that we're fine. And if the investigator is not African American, and believe me, less than 3% of research is conducted by African American investigators. Isn't that pathetic? Less than 3%. Whereas almost 98 or 99% of research includes African Americans. But when the investigator, the principal investigator and decision maker, the one who gets the money, is not African Americans, what usually happens? They usually hire some black staff, right? To trot out into the community and to do what? Focus groups, because that's where the culture will emerge. Do you ever hear people say, I'm going to discuss culture today for you? I'm going to tell you what my cultural belief is. People don't even know how to ask questions to get at culture. It doesn't pop out. People don't even know what their culture is in African America, do they? No, they don't know. Because we have been so brainwashed to think that during slavery we lost it. How can you lose your culture? Excuse me. How can you lose your culture? That's like taking off all your clothes and not even know you're naked. Ours was a verbal history. That means that the griots were also brought over here as slaves. They told the story. They told it in the middle of the night. They wrote it on their hands, their arms. They told it in their fables. We have a history and a culture. It's quite vibrant. People don't even know how to look for it and acknowledge it. So it is not a part of the theories that we use. It's not a part of the measures. There's been nobody really funded to do this kind of work. And culturally congruent research designs are very hard to find, as I said. So when we talk about these issues, I'm not even prepared to tell you. Just as the speaker before me did, I have all these measures available, and all you need to do is email me. No, I don't. This work has to be done by you. Some of you who are young and early in your careers, and you're not tired, and you can get funding to do this kind of work. This is where we need it. If you want to make a contribution, study cultural beliefs and attitudes. Give me a hand. A few of you said, come on. I got an ego. The language of ethnic matching. This is really what galls people. People are afraid to acknowledge that it matters if you speak to an African American, if you are African American or not. Oh my goodness. Why? Can't you have a little xenophobia? That means you think your group's kind of better, you know, kind of used to your rules and your values, and everybody else is a little odd. Can we have a little xenophobia going on here? Ethnic matching means that people like to be seen by the person who looks like them. I tell parents, take your children out out of schools where they're the only African American, a minority. Take them out. Because if that school doesn't understand that you need to see yourself, not just in your peers, but in the authority of the school, then they're off the track. I don't care what you learn. If it doesn't have diversity, take them out of there. That's not where they need to be. That's like putting them in the middle of the desert and expecting for them to dig to find the water. How do those teachers know what to teach that one little child? When my 2-year-old granddaughter came back from daycare and she was rubbing her arm, have you heard me say this before? And she said, too dark, too dark. It was my day to pick her up. And I said, what are you saying, baby? Because it didn't make sense to me. She said, too dark, Grammy. I said, who said that to you, baby? She said, the children. She said, they rub off my brown. The children thought that she was just dirty, that they hadn't had any kind of introduction into diversity. Honey, I couldn't get myself out of that car fast enough to get back into that school to say, don't you let another day go by before you bring these teachers to sit down and talk to my daughter, who I knew was going to take care of that business, because she was raised by me and my husband. We don't grow children who don't have ethnic immersion in our household. And everybody goes to a historically black college. If you don't go undergrad, you go grad. But you find out who you are so nobody can take that away from you. Okay, and that's the problem today. Everybody's tiptoeing around ethnicity like there's something wrong with it. Looking instead at race. Your skin color doesn't tell you anything. Your nappiness of your hair doesn't tell you anything. The size of your nose and lips, everybody wants today. You're behind, everybody's pumping themselves up and wearing padded girths. Am I lying? To try to get that look now. They call it the J-Lo look or the Beyonce look. Heck, we've had that look for thousands of years. You look at the Venus Hottentot and you look at her behind. She was victimized and abused because she had an outstanding derriere. She also had outstanding labia. And a lot of people don't talk about the sexualization of racism and the fascination that people have with the black body. It's scary to me to think that now they're circumcising African men when they never even taught them how to wash and to pull down their foreskins. They're now circumcising them and taking the foreskins off. These are adult men, because there's been one study that's shown that HIV was less likely to be transmitted in men who were circumcised, and lots of other studies have shown there is no definitive difference, and there certainly isn't any definitive difference when it comes to women and their infection rates. And yet now this is a whole movement all over the world to circumcise men, and I question that, because the black penis is something that a whole lot of people have been fixated on for thousands of years. And now what we're doing is reducing it without trying to clean it and teach men how to care for it. And it concerns me greatly that our ethnicity is being torn apart by shreds, and we don't stand up. People don't stand up and understand its vibrancy. Well, we were conducting a research project in the 90s when Magic Johnson disclosed that he was HIV positive. So I saw it as a perfect time to add several questions that had to do. This was a study with 3 ethnic groups, 900 women who were representative of African American, Latina, Mexican American, and European American women between the ages of 18 and 50 in Los Angeles County. So what we found was single women reported more drug use before sex, a greater fear of sex due to STDs, more sexual partners, and a greater change in these behaviors as a result of Magic Johnson's disclosure compared to married women. You see that same phenomena of single women doing very risky things. Well, what stopped them and what made them think twice and begin to change their behavior? It was Magic Johnson, who was out there having sex with a whole bunch of people, including single women, saying, I'm infected. I'm a celebrity, I'm a basketball player, and I am infected. That slammed people in the face. If only we had more people who had the courage, right, to come forward and to let people know that it's not celebrity. It doesn't have a thing to do with who you are, does it have? It has something to do with the transmission of the virus and the social networking that goes on and the denial that some of these issues really truly belong. The ethnic matching made the difference. And I say to you, that unless the studies that you're doing, unless the studies that you're a part of have the kind of representation and decision making at the very top level, you shouldn't be a part of a study that only hires research assistants that look like the population that you are dealing with. I won't do a study of men without a co-principal investigator who's a man. And I would prefer to be the co-principal investigator and not the PI. Because I've never been a man. I don't know what it's like to be a man. I'm married to one. I've raised one, but I don't know. I don't have that experience. I don't know how people can tell me that it doesn't make any difference as long as you know how to do good research. I disagree with that. I think the reason we have fewer than 3% of ethnic minorities who are funded to do research at NIH is because people haven't had the opportunity and people haven't been righteously indignacious like I have to stand up in front of groups and say what I'm saying to you today. Now it's going to be on you to do something with it. To challenge people when you get pink sheets back. They're not actually pink anymore. But that's the response from the review committee. Or even before your grants get reviewed, to question the diversity on the group and what is the expertise of those individuals. Because some of those people are black and lost. Don't know, scared, afraid, and want to be socially appropriate and blend in. Am I lying? And they will vote against somebody, just like they vote against political people because they say certain people don't have enough experience. Excuse me. Have you ever seen any other groups so torn and confused about themselves? You know, I was at Harvard once on a panel with Tony Brown, and he said African Americans are the only group who still want to be accepted and loved in this nation. Other groups will simply let you know they don't care anymore how they're treated. They simply get their finances together and go buy whatever it is they couldn't get in or ride in or have. They go get it financially so that nobody can deny them. But nobody's going to affirm for you. Each and every one of you have to affirm for yourselves within the context of your family. It's not going to come from this society. And as long as people are externally oriented, you're always going to be rejected if you are brown and nappy-headed and big-nosed and big lips and big-bottomed, well-endowed and hanging low. Cultural competence. This is a word that's bandied about, isn't it, today? Everyone wants to be culturally competent. I don't think I've ever gotten more requests to come and speak about cultural competence. It should be required for everyone. How in the world can people hire people today and not certify their competence to work with different groups? And not just not knowing the terms that they use, it's the history, it's the skills, it's the values, and understanding how people have been discriminated against in terms of disparities. If you don't know that, you don't have the questions to ask. Sexual identity for African Americans is extremely fluid. Why is it fluid? Because of slavery. My goodness, we had to do any and everything in order to survive. How can you look at people and simply ask them, are you heterosexual? Because I'm not going to ask you about anything else. Are we just going to talk about him and her? Because I'm not going to ask you about same-gender loving. But this is exactly what you find when you do groups and when you do research with African American men. We have a study that's coming out on the bottom of this slide on African American and actually Latino men. What we found, these were men who were HIV positive, who all had histories of sexual abuse. We found that these men had different types of ways that they identified themselves, and they did not identify as gay. That was not the word they used. They said, this is not a happy thing. We said, well, why? I wasn't in the groups because I'm a woman. I would not sit in a group with men. Lord have mercy, I've got men doing groups with women. Who? Why? It's just a quick way of doing something that's inappropriate. Okay? I would not sit in a group. How are they going to tell me what they need to say? I need to have my investigators sit in that room. What they said was that being gay for a black man, Latino man, and there were two different groups. We did not add them because the Latino men wanted their own group, and they all spoke in their own language. We're talking about their feelings of being isolated, rejected from their own communities. Isolation they experienced by being same-gender loving, and secondly, that this wasn't happy. They had to leave their churches. They had to keep a secret. They had to bring women to Easter dinner or Christmas dinner, but they weren't interested in those women. Many of them had married in an attempt to try to, quote, straighten themselves out and do the, quote, right thing, only to find that that was not for them. So there were a lot of bodies strewn behind them as a result of their not feeling, that they could make decisions about who they were. So when you talk about identity and orientation, it's not the same. We have some interventions that are developed for men and women, but they never sort all these issues out. How can you do that? It's amazing to me. These are all published materials I'm talking about. Sometimes substance abuse escalates when people are in recovery because nobody talks to them about their sexuality and what it is that they've been exposed to and what it is that they're actually doing on their own. So sometimes we make the issues worse by overlooking the issues that we should be talking about. Disparities, historical disparities in trauma. I developed a model, a sexual health model, that includes 3 variables, 3 constructs. One is body touching and awareness. This was a major issue that has gender and spiritual and religious overtones. But many people are taught not to touch their bodies. Have you ever heard of the story of Onan in the Old Testament? How many of you have heard? Read it. If you haven't, you've got to read some of this. The story of Onan talks about a brother whose brother passed away, and he was responsible, in those days. Wives of brothers had to be taken care of by your brother. You would inseminate that woman to keep the line going, right? So this brother Onan did not want to have sex with his brother's wife. So he spilled his seed on the ground. And so this whole story came about. So that's the story that's used to discourage people from stimulating or pleasuring themselves. I could use the term masturbation, but for so many people, that's not an acceptable term to use at a university. I don't know where Columbia stands, but I guess I just said it. But a lot of people don't feel that it's appropriate to touch their bodies. When I ask African American women about touching their breasts and touching between their legs, they say, oh, no, I don't do that. First of all, that's freaky. And secondly, my partner's supposed to do that. That's not for me, that's for my partner. My body is for my partner. I give myself blindly to my partner. Okay, so why do African American women die more of breast cancer than European American women? They don't do breast self-exams. You see, this has a deep significance. It's not just something where you can say people don't know. No, they have cultural beliefs that actually prohibit. So what do we do in our intervention? We teach women to bring in their mothers, their sisters, their partners, anyone that they feel appropriate can touch their breast. And we will teach that person to do the breast self-exam. It's not important to try to break them down on something that's important to them. It's important that somebody does the mapping of the lumps and the bumps. You know what I'm talking about, ladies? So you know what's there, and if anything's bigger or if it's moved or something's new, you know exactly what's going on. Body touching is very important. Why is it important in HIV? If you don't touch your body, are you going to touch a penis? No. Even men. I have identified some men who have never touched their own penises. They get in a bathroom stall and do this like you're skiing. Isn't that something? And know how to aim, okay? But in terms of touching and exploring and pulling back that foreskin, Right? Sexual ownership's huge issue, isn't it? Who is supposed to be responsible for your body? Taking care of it, knowing what it needs, and protecting it. That has also been a cultural belief, and it was a belief that grew out of slavery. You didn't have control of your own sexuality. This is an important notion to have to redirect, while acknowledging that it's nice if you have a partner and you can give yourself to that partner. But that's not realistic in the 21st century, is it? And then finally, interconnectedness. This is the one concept that kept us alive as a people. Interconnectedness, the ability to relate to somebody and to value their life and the quality of it more than your own. It is a strong and powerful notion that is reinforced by religion and by culture. If we didn't have interconnectedness, we would have passed away on the shores of America. That is, you just took somebody else who wasn't even related to you, and you took them in if they were little and if they were hungry, and you cared for them. That is a powerful tool within our community that some people don't even use today because they see African Americans as so deficient. These are the 3 concepts that we use as mediators and interventions. And it's a very powerful experience to acknowledge that these things can't be taken away, but they need to be adjusted and reframed so that people can live. The language of emotional processing. thing, and this is one I can talk to you all day about. But that is that now we use the audio computer-assisted interview. Are you familiar with the Acassi? Or you don't use the audio at all. You just use the computer and have people respond to a survey on a computer. That's the CADI, computer-assisted interview. Nobody talks to people at all today. Hello, my name is Jean. Let me sit you down in front of the computer. Some people have never talked to a non-judgmental professional about anything having to do with sex, their bodies, their sexuality, the concerns that they have. I think that we can't become so depersonalized that we think that in order to hurry through and get a whole lot of people seen, we can avoid that interconnectedness as a professional. Okay? Emotional processing involves speaking in the dialect or the language to someone who can be empathic, non-judgmental, and who can hear you. In my studies, we never collect any kind of data having to do with sexual coercion, abuse, or violence, or physical coercion without doing it face-to-face. I don't believe that that's an appropriate way of collecting data. So many of these experiences have never been disclosed before the studies are actually conducted. And I think that the best way to do it is to train interviewers to be empathic, non-judgmental, and to be able to take down the information of all the incidents that a person has. Now, is that easy to do? Absolutely not. You can't rip through a computerized interview with that kind of format, because we even have to ask the interviewers themselves about their own sexual and physical abuse experience. You can't train people to do these interviews and expect that they can separate out their own lives without working with them first. This is very difficult. And I think one of the most frustrating aspects of where we are with almost 30 years of funded research in HIV and AIDS and behavior change is that we don't talk about mental health. It's not one of the Debbies or the Ebbies. Mental health issues are not even included. And I don't know of a group of people in the world that more need mental health addressed than African-descended people. I just don't. I don't understand how we can expect people to change their behavior just because we tell them to. But when you talk to people, then you begin to see the level of fear, anger, shame, and all the other emotions that are important to discuss. But you have to be able to do it in the right kind of training format so that it is data that's important to record. Body language is something that people know more about when it comes to looking at African-descended people, because the body language is usually very, very telling, isn't it? You can tell when somebody's getting ready to go off on you, can't you? Their eye contact is direct. They get way up in your face, don't they? What's that called in the community go? You know about playing the dozens? Okay, people don't know about the dozens. It's actually a TV show, which is interesting to me. But, this means that you can take a lot of verbal abuse, right? When you play the dozens, you talk about somebody's mama. You know it now? You say your mama wears combat boots. Well, that's an easy, simple one. But, they're quite elaborate. And if you get angry, if you back up like you're getting ready to fight, or you get hurt, you've lost. Okay. The psychology of it is to be able to toughen people up, to be able to hear insulting, denigrating kinds of verbal assaults on a person. Okay. So body language is very clear. If I put my hands on my hips and start rolling like this, I'm getting ready to do something. It's not nice, don't you? I'm getting ready to go off. So body language is important, but people don't know, just as the speaker before me said, some people don't know how to do anything else other than get right up in somebody's face. They think that's conversation. Well, in Los Angeles, that gets you in jail for being aggressive, all right? Because they don't know about physical space. I was in the grocery store. This is a little aside. I love these kind of little asides. I was in the grocery store on Valentine's Day getting my cards. I was very late, so everybody was in a panic. I understand that. And the lady behind me, I'm not kidding you, was right here next to me. And so, I was writing my little check, and she was, obviously able to look. So I said, "Excuse me, you're in my space." She said, "Well, I'm just in a hurry." I said, "I don't really care. Get away from me." Because, see, she wasn't going to move. She had a daughter, and she had her little stuff already up on the belt. Well, it was my turn. I have to carve my space out. See, if I'd done that for her, she would have called the manager on me, especially if I had said, what I really wanted to say. I just said, "Move away from me." Get away. Let me tell you how far you need to be so that it's my turn, this is my register, this is my checker. But body language says a lot. It says either you don't have space because it's really about me and you're not important, or it's about my anger and my inability to control it. But aggressive posturing has to be replaced with something else. A lot of people are frustrated and angry, and they need to learn how to step back and what that means. And a lot of kids in school don't have this kind of education. People who've been incarcerated don't have this kind of education. They have to relearn body language. It says a lot. Language of funding reinforces the traditional, not what we've been talking about this morning. Reviewers don't have this information. Neither do principal investigators, as I've shared, and the congruence of cultural values is still something that hasn't been researched. So this is our Center for Cultural Trauma and Mental Health Disparities. We're 2 years old. We were funded by the National Institute of Mental Health, and what we're doing is biobehavioral research, trying to understand the effects of trauma on the biological functioning of men and women, underrepresented populations, in order to be able to get a clearer sense of why people don't get the kind of mental health services and why we don't understand their mental health. A lot of ethnic minorities are overdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, not diagnosed at all. And we really have to improve the kind of track record that we have. If you look over to your far right, some of the most exciting work has to do with the allostatic load. Are you familiar with it? Studying stress and cortisol and the distribution of hormones. We posit that African Americans, Latinos, other underrepresented groups are going to have higher levels of stress than any other groups, and that it's going to contribute to their mental health, it's going to contribute to their dying faster, earlier, and having old bodies inside while they may be young, but literally being burned out because of the micro assaults that go on every day. That little lady standing next to me in line in the Valentine's Day parade, so it was, because everybody was late with their cards, stressed me out. Because then I had to calm myself down to get my cards written and in their little envelopes and go home and say, Happy Valentine's Day. And what I really wanted to say, do you know what that lady did to me in line? And if you don't have somebody at home that you can go home and talk to about these micro assaults, they become macro assaults, don't they? The next person who comes up to you who might be too close to you or just say something, you go off on. And they didn't actually do anything. But it's because we don't sometimes have that direct communication and get rid of the stress that causes people then to react in ways that other people don't understand. So, language is an important concept. Understanding what's happened in our culture, understanding the cumulative effects of experiences, understanding how to measure each one, understanding the biological phenomena is just as important as the behavior. There is no quick and dirty way to understand how to change people's behavior. They've got to not only want to, they've got to understand that what they have learned has a value, but it needs to be adjusted. You can't take it away. You have to substitute something for it, because in certain situations, people will go back to it. When I go home for holidays or in the evenings, I speak dialect. When I'm here with you now, I'm doing my best to speak standard English. If I be telling you just how tired I am, would you really think that I am as incredible as I'd like you to think I be? And you know, that is just as grammatically and syntactically correct as what I just said to you now. There is nothing wrong with speaking in dialect. It just isn't valued. What we need to do is value ourselves, because if you don't, nobody else will. And that's everybody in this room. Everybody has an ethnicity. What we need to do is give other people permission to be who they are and have the beliefs and values that they've grown up with. What we need to do is create an environment where the differences can be discussed, because we really have more similarities than differences. What we need to do is allow for the differences to challenge us so that we can incorporate them into behavior change interventions. Change the system, and we can only do that with a consensus and more of us that are fighting this than me. I think that you can do that, and I hope that you heard me this morning. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, that was fantastic. I'd be so happy. Now, I know some of you be hungry, but we best ask some really good questions right about now. Okay. So, what we'd like for you to do is to come up to the microphone. Maybe, Ty, you can move it back. Yes. And so what we'd like to do is have those of you with questions, and you're willing to articulate in your preferred ethnic mode, to come forward and ask some really great questions. So who has a question? We have 13 minutes for questions, so this is really extraordinary.
I have a really quick question.
Okay.
I just have a really brief question on your notion of the 70 African American women. 70, hit me again. Was the 70 African American men to 100 African American women?
Yes.
That sort of presumes that racial concordance is the prerequisite for finding a mate. Have we ever tested that notion?
And yes. If you ask people who they prefer, I have. Most African American women prefer African American men. There is an increase from 4 to 13% of couples in the United States that are not matched ethnically. So I think the trend is moving, and it has to move for African American women, or they won't marry. If marriage is important, if you would just want a partner, it's maybe not so much an issue. But if you want to partner with someone like you, what it means is that there's an imbalance, and the imbalance was not created simply by chance. It was created because of incarceration, of death, of men who are not interested in women, and then finally infant mortality contributes. So we need to raise girls in a different way, don't we? Because my mother raised me to marry a black man, and I did. I wasn't bringing anybody else home. That's all there was to it. And that may sound racist to some people. I've been on television. I taught my children. I said, bring someone home who looks like me. That's honoring me. And my son said, well, by the year 2050, we're all going to be brown. And I said, but we're not in 2050, baby. So I married a black woman. Yeah.
My question is if we wondered about the fluidity of what's more important, is it to be partnered or to be partnered with someone who's ethnically
It depends on the person, doesn't it? Some people will say it's to be partnered by someone who looks like me. Some people will say love has no color. And I truly believe that. I think everyone has to decide for themselves. But for the person says, I will not have anything to do with somebody else, then we need to tell them what that means. Because what it means is you're making a decision that may affect your entire life. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace.
Thank you.
But I think the lady on
All right.
the other side
Yes.
first.
Okay. Well,
Thank you. I don't know if this is on, but can you hear me?
No, put it on.
I really want to hear your question, so.
It is? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Everything that you said, I just feel deeply about through my own professional experiences working in research, specifically dealing with HIV and prevention in the Southeast that oftentimes targets the African American community specifically. I feel fortunate to be a part of that effort. But one of the things that I found challenging is that the way that you talked about people's experience and what their cultural values are, where African American women are concerned that they're making certain decisions that are putting them at risk because of their socioeconomic status or their community or what have you, living in a rural community, limited partner selection and so on and so forth. But one of the things that I thought that was really empowering that I've tried to do myself is not say, well, what you're doing is wrong, but to try to come up with some strategies on how if they feel like that's something that they still want to continue to do, how they can do it better, how they can do it safer.
Yes.
What are some of the things that you're recommending to women as you're finding this trend?
Well, you raise a very good question because a lot of people don't have options. They really do have to stay in the situation that they are in. For instance, I work with a lot of sex workers. I think that's a great example. of a group that you probably want to say, oh, stop that. You know, come on out of there. I've worked with call girls and sex workers in Las Vegas and in California. These are women who are wealthier than I'll ever be, so you know they're not going to stop doing what they're doing, right? Living very well, and what's the motivation to change? It's not because they realize they're at risk. They know more about the body than I do. They have taught me how to teach people about the body. They know so much about the body. So where do I go with that? I go back. What were you supposed to do with your life? Okay, I truly believe that the reasons that the rates are so high amongst some groups is because they have no context. Just looking at condom use, who recommended that when we were the ones that were a part of the clinical trials for condoms? Do you know that? And birth control pills. You know, people don't understand that the reason some people don't want to use these things is because they saw in their lifetimes people using them who got blood clots, in the example of birth control pills, or Norplant, who couldn't get those things out of their arms because they went way up in their shoulders and had to have major surgery. They don't understand the trauma that has come from being a group that people felt that they could exploit. So you have to ask questions about how has your family been treated in the past. We do research at places that wouldn't even allow black people to go to school. Columbia is one of them. Am I lying? And UCLA's another. I'm not just picking on. Who's been to this clinic? You ever been here and not been able to be served? You gotta get a history. What do you know about your people? What did God intend for you to do? Why are you here? Was it to make money by using your body? Most of the women that I talked to at Secular said, no, I really wanted to be a teacher. Got my hook. Well, what stopped you? I had to make money. I got pregnant when I was 12. Well, what was that all about? Well, my stepfather was abusing me, got my second hook. You see, if you take the time to do the qualitative work, you're going to find a way to bring those people out. Do you think that this is the way you want to end your life? What do you want your children to know about? Because most of these women who were so wealthy, their children thought they were business women. Well, they were. But you see, they didn't know what the business was. I said, what are your children going to say about you when they find out? Because they're going to find out. You see, you can get people. You got to come at it another way than just saying, well, you're going to die. Hey, I could die going home in LA, right? From the airport to my husband's car. Because that's just the deal it is. So you have to know people and you have to have a clinical background. You have to train in that area to know how to. I can sell used cars because I know how, not because I want to be manipulative, but you got to be able to get to people's hearts. See, HIV is all cognitive, isn't it? If you know there's a risk, you'll change your behavior. Not if I can have somebody of my very own and I've never had anybody. Not if anybody can say, hey, baby, and say it to me in a way that I've never heard before. Hey, I'm going to die anyway. And what I hear from couples, we have a study with serodiscordant couples, and one of the sites is here in Columbia. The other is in Atlanta with Gina Wingood and Ralph DiClemente. The other's in Philadelphia with the Jamaats. Is that the negative partners in serodiscordant couples, that's where one's positive and one is negative. The negative one will say, hey, I love this person, I'm going to die, we'll die together. That's true love. So you have to understand emotions, history, what their legacy is, what they want, how they want to be remembered. Where is this in an intervention? Okay? So shall we go to you, sir?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wallace, for your
Wyatt.
input. Wyatt, sorry.
Hey, dude, you gave me another name.
Secret name.
That's all right.
Dr. Wyatt.
Yes.
Thank you for your important insights. I'm a clinician, and I was fortunate enough to be born and grew up in Harlem. Not too far from this street, a little bit further north. And it's the first time that I've heard about the dozens, because when I grew up, we used to play the dozens all the time in school and so forth. And when I learned to be a clinician, it was clear that this was something that had come out of Vienna with upper class folks, where you sit and you go, And my first patients were truck drivers and stuff. They look at me, you know, until I started talking English. And then the kids. I discovered that the kids didn't know how to play the dozens, and that was part of the problem. So we had to practice playing the dozen.
You played?
In psychotherapy.
Whoa.
In psychotherapy.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and I did a book on it also about how you play the dozens, and one of the ways in which you treat certain kinds of kids who are designated as hyperactive.
Yes.
They're not hyperactive. Some of them don't know how to play the dozens. Okay. But thank you so much, because
Thank you for sharing that. Yes.
talking the same
You
language.
know, this can be done, can't it? This is not rocket science. We simply have to move out of our comfort level and out of the Western way. Yes, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My question for you is, what do we do as educators, those who are not going to be doing research or going to be teachers in the classroom?
Yes.
And possibly future administrators? What do we do concerning these issues? Because I think a lot of the issues you stated in your research, you start seeing, you know, the girls who are sexually active. And I teach middle school, and so for some of them, for some of the conversations they have in the classroom, sometimes they tell you things. What can we as role models, especially those of us who were at one time a teenager or African American female teenager, what can we do as possible role models and educators with these group of young women?
That's such a great question. Thank you for asking me. My parents were teachers, and I actually learned quite a bit from the back of the classroom, because after my class was over, I'd go and sit in their classes until we were ready to go home. And what I saw them doing was to involve the entire class in whatever educational experience needed to go on. So if there was a little side conversation about sex or some, you know, anything, that it had to be a part of the group, that what they did was create a whole group in that class. Those kids had an affiliation and a tie to one another that spanned beyond just the fact that they were sitting together. They all had to achieve. See, that's collectivism, isn't it? And that's interconnectedness. There wasn't anybody who just made an A. It was the whole class who had to make it. And if you knew somebody who was fooling around, you sat them down because you say, hey, our class can't listen. We can't learn if you sit. So come on, you know, be a part of us. Don't stand out. Don't act out. And then the second thing that I saw them do was involve all of the teachers. They created a community that had the same idea and the same concept. It wasn't one teacher. You can't do it by yourself. You see teachers being given awards in the United States. I know there are other people that are involved in their success with kids, because you can't just do it yourself. You'll be worn out, won't you? With one class, you'll be worn down, because today, and I work with schools, the teachers are raising them. They've got extra clothes, and they bring clothes. They've got clinics. They've got washcloths because the children are dirty and need. I mean, it's just amazing. They give them coffee because the children are working all night to support their families to come to school. What children are going through today is just unspeakable. But you can't change the entire system. So we bring in the entire teacher body and the principals to support the efforts of these teachers. Some other teachers need to know they're studying the same frustrations. And it isn't just an ethnic thing. Sometimes for some kids, other individuals who aren't matching the groups can make certain levels and certain lessons more real for them. So what I suggest you do is to get together with a group of teachers and go to your principal and say, we want diversity. We want ethnic immersion in a different way. And we think that we want to bring in information into our classroom and to our school so that kids really do understand they have options, they have choices. And the prouder they are of themselves, the less likely they are to act out sexually, drug-wise, criminal-wise, right? This is not rocket science. And they can achieve. Does that help you? Okay. This side is failing me. I need someone in the
No,
mic.
she's next.
Okay.
So we want you to kind of get to your question quickly, because I put a little bit of cushion in the program.
All right.
But we're running
All
over
right.
here.
I'll make my answers shorter. I want to hear from everyone who wants to talk to me, please.
All right. Hello, Dr. Wyatt.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Kimberly O'Shields, and I'm a holistic health counselor.
Mhm.
I'm here with my colleague, Rodney Fisher.
Yes.
And I want to ask you, I have a question to ask regarding
Keep it close to your mouth.
regarding sexual behavior.
Yes.
As a holistic health counselors, we look at mind, body, and spirit.
Mhm.
So when we're talking to our clients and we're looking at their behaviors as far as what they're eating, a lot of it is driven by emotional eating.
Yes.
And some of them do have some issues such as sexual abuse in the past. A lot of it may be related to sex, so they may turn to food. And I was wondering, in your research, have you ever touched on that piece of it, the nutritional component? Because although they may not be dying directly from an STD, they could be killing themselves because of their poor nutritional choices.
Yes.
They're dying from heart disease.
Yes.
Diabetes.
We know.
Yeah, so I just want to know if one done any research in that area, and if not, we also founded the National Association of Black Health Counselors, and we have a team of people who may be interested in doing that research.
Yes.
And how would we go about partnering with you?
Well, I have cards, so I'm going to bring them down when I'm all finished. No, I have not done the research. What I have done is to ask African American women about their bodies, Latinas about their bodies, and it definitely has a connection to the early sexualization that we put on some very early, girls who are what I call oversized before they get into puberty, that they look like they have breast development. They don't. They're just chubby. And, chubby goes, breasts are just fat, right? We all know that. I mean, it's just fat tissue. So they look like they're developing, and they're approached by the rest of the community and the world as little precocious girls. They're hit on, and in order to discourage this is with Cobbs and Greer in that very old book in the 50s, Black Rage. That is an absolute classic if you want to read about this. They talked about it. Black girls overeating in order to make themselves actually less attractive, so that they would not be sexualized too early. And then, of course, once you get that history and you don't have a good exercise regimen and you don't have a good diet, that fat stays with you. And so you go on from puberty into the rest of sometimes your adulthood as an overweight person. So it is definitely an important thing to look at, because body image is part of that body awareness concept that it wasn't on this screen, but it is part of it, and people being aware underneath their chins and above their knees. Black women, Latina women spend more money on their hair, their makeup, their fingernails, and their shoes. Isn't that amazing? And not on anything that has anything to do with the trunk. Okay, that's like a no-fly zone. So we absolutely have to help people to identify, who do you want to be? This may not be how you look now, but how do you want to look? And that the standards have to be ethnic, right? And we actually have some out there that are well proportioned, so they don't have to be rail thin like they used to be. It's a very important topic, and you should be studying it.
The preceding program was brought to you by Teachers College, Columbia University. Please visit us online at itunes.tc.columbia.edu.